What's the strangest coincidence you've ever personally experienced? Story 1. In freshman physics, I became friends with the Japanese kid next to me. After a while, he was helping me with my Japanese homework. Did really well after that, by the way. But after that class, we kind of drifted apart. Fast forward 2 years where I'm an exchange student in Japan over the summer and doing some sightseeing in Kyoto after the program. I'm crossing the street in Kyoto and I hear my name being called out. I look around and there he is. Thousands of miles apart, we meet again. We got some drinks and good food together. It was a blast. No, his hometown was not Kyoto. He was also doing sightseeing while home for the summer. I once heard someone say there is like a weird paradox where the further you travel from home, the greater your chance of bumping into someone you know. From the Midwest traveling to Italy, hope you're ready to bump into your old pre-algebra teacher. Story 2. A few years back, my dad went on a trip to Denmark for a business trip. My mom, being Danish, decided that she was going to come along. She'd always heard stories about the side of the family that never moved to America, but she had no idea where they lived or if any of them were still around. Anyway, after a week in the country, my mom and dad are driving down a country road when their car got a flat. There wasn't really any cell reception, so they actually wound up walking to a driveway a bit to ask the locals to use their phone. They walked up the steps of this little cottage, knocked on the door, and an elderly woman came to the door. Her eyes lit up, fixed on my mom, and wound up giving her a hug. My parents were understandably confused, as the old woman's husband was also excited to see my mom. The couple didn't really speak any English, but they led my parents down the main hallway to their guest room. There on the dresser was a photo of my mom and her brothers from their high school graduation. The old couple were my mother's great aunt and uncle, the ones that never came to the USA. To this day, my parents still can't explain it. Story 3. In grade 10 English class, the teacher didn't have anything planned for us to do, and it was close to the end of the year, I guess, so she goes to the big cupboard in the corner and pulls out a stack of copies. It's examples of a successful essay written during a final exam so we can learn what a good one looks like and how to build a narrative, etc. The topic of these was, what was the most pivotal moment in your life? There's 3 examples ranging in proficiency. We read through the first 2, and I volunteered to read the last one aloud. I start reading, and I stop. The essay was about me. My big sister had gotten a really good mark 6 years earlier on her final exam essay, which she wrote about the day I was born. I got pretty emotional about that one. Story 4. Too long didn't read, bought old pants at Goodwill 10,000 kilometers from home. Appear to come from hometown. Full story. I went on a 3-week trip through Costa Rica 4 years ago. I needed to buy a new pair of shorts since I didn't bring enough. We couldn't find any regular clothing stores, so we ended up in a place where second-hand clothes were sold. They got their clothes from all over the world, wherever people collected clothes for the less fortunate. We call it Humanitas over here in the Netherlands. There are collection bins all over the country. I bought an ugly pair of cargo shorts. In one of the pockets, I found a 3-year-old festival token, a festival that takes place 20 kilometers from my home. I'm sure it wasn't mine because I never went to that festival. So these pants came all the way from my hometown to Costa Rica, only to be flown back there by me. Maybe the pants wanted to go back. Maybe someone back in the Netherlands was calling to them and used you to return them. Do the pants happen to have some kind of even elven writing on them? Quick, cast them into the fire! Story 5. I was planning on ending my life. Then somebody made a post somewhere about giving free Steam games. I clicked on it to see what it's about and saw their profile having a in memory of, then another user's profile, their friend's profile who died 10 years ago. Then I go to their profile and see all their friends constantly posting on their profile every year on their birthday or Thanksgiving or Christmas. Everything they made sure to remember him, and at that moment I realized that I also probably have people like that who'd be so sad if I'm gone, and it made me think of things differently. Story 6. A few years back, my dad went on a trip to Denmark for a business trip. My mom, being Danish, decided that she was going to come along. She'd always heard stories about the side of the family that never moved to America, but she had no idea where they lived or if any of them were still around. Anyway, after a week in the country, my mom and dad are driving down a country road when their car got a flat. There wasn't really any cell reception, so they actually wound up walking to a driveway a bit to ask the locals to use their phone. They walked up the steps of this little cottage, knocked on the door, and an elderly woman came to the door. Her eyes lit up, fixed on my mom, and wound up giving her a hug. My parents were understandably confused, as the old woman's husband was also excited to see my mom. The couple didn't really speak any English, but they led my parents down the main hallway to their guest room. There on the dresser was a photo of my mom and her brothers from their high school graduation. The old couple were my mother's great aunt and uncle, the ones that never came to the USA. To this day, my parents still can't explain it. Now that is one heck of a coincidence. Like, granted, she went there with some intention of seeking them out, but to get a flat tire and then go to their house by chance? That's wild and honestly pretty amazing. Story 7. Had recently moved cities and had a new local phone number. Had to make a lot of calls to various utilities, etc. to get everything all set up. I call one of them, I'm speaking with a customer service rep. All is going fine until she asks for my phone number. When I tell her, she starts freaking out on me. Who were you? How did you find me? How do you know that phone number? Kinda stuff. Eventually managed to get her calmed down to the point where we could figure out what was going on. Turned out she had been in an abusive relationship where her ex had stalked and harassed her, including him and his friend, making threatening calls constantly. Eventually she had moved to a different part of the city and taken a new unlisted phone number. My new phone number was her old one, and the moment I said if she assumed she had tracked her down once again, and the harassment campaign was about to begin anew. I'm not sure she truly believed me when I explained it all, but we eventually got through the phone call. Story 8. When I was 18, I lived in a town a very long ways away from where I ended up moving. I struck up a friendship with this guy from work in that town. We play Halo, watch movies, etc., and he was awesome. I ended up moving suddenly due to a family emergency and never got his contact information. I didn't even remember his name a decade later, but I thought of him often as he was an awesome guy through all the years. 11 years later, I'm working at my job carpooling with someone from my training class, and one night he asks if I mind his roommate being in the car as he was going to take the car after we got off work and use it for the night. He introduces us, I turn around, and in the back seat is the guy from the town a very long ways away. We reconnected immediately and now live together. He's my best friend for sure and the godfather to my children. Story 9. Told this story everywhere, but I'm making you all read it again. Was at a convention. There were only a few people in the room. My friend and I wanted an autograph from a voice actor. He started singing in his character voice. There were two random guys next to me. One pulled out a video camera to record it. Years later, my husband and I are talking with friends and the convention comes up. The guy with the video camera was my husband. I also took a picture later that day of the crowds and he is in that picture. I stood next to my husband years before I met him. Edit. Thank you to everyone who shared their stories. Amazing how our lives can intersect. And a big thank you to those who gifted silver. It's a major award. This is a really cute story, and it put quite the smile on my face, but you have earned just the slightest bit of my ire for not saying who the voice actor was, or the voice he was doing. Was it me? Probably not, as I haven't done any conventions, at least not as a voice actor, and I doubt any conventions would want me for my stunning performance as nameless NPC in Payday 2. Yeah, I use this comment as an excuse to brag. Sue me. Story 10. When I was 1 year old, we moved to a city some 500 kilometers away from where I was born. 15 years later, my father decided to put me in a boarding school in the area of that first city because he went there too. I got randomly put in a room with two other guys. One of them is still my best friend today. When I first visited that school at his home, I discovered that he not only lives in the same city as we did, not much of a coincidence as it's the only major city in that area, but in the same effing house. Of course, I couldn't remember our old house, so I called my father to confirm that it's the same address, and it turns out that he briefly knew my friend's family from selling the house. Edit. I hate you and today say I'm totally right with that. Story 11. My best friend in high school had the exact same locker combination as me in a school of 1,200 people. I saw a combo written on a piece of paper of his and asked why he wrote down my combo. He looked confused and said that's his combo. The combination locks are changed and reassigned each year. Edit. Miss you, buddy. Story 12. I don't know if this counts as a coincidence because it might be influenced by the commonalities between us, but I was reading through one of my dad's old journals and found out that he and I share the same reoccurring nightmare. The details are basically identical, even down to the frequency of it happening once a month. It's very trippy. Edit. Just to add some facts, as far as I can remember, I never discussed this with my dad. I felt okay perusing his journal because he's been dead for quite a while now, before his time, but having nothing in common with the details of the dream. Story 13. I'm from Canada. When I was 20, I went to Australia to travel for 6 months. While I was there, I ran into a couple guys I had gone to college with in the same hostel I was staying at. They didn't come with me when I went to the bar that night, but I ended up walking back with 3 other Canadians. While chatting to them, I mentioned the other 2 guys I knew at the hostel by name. Let's call one Cyrus. One guy stops dead and says, "Cyrus' last name?" Turns out my friend was his childhood best friend he hadn't seen in 12 years. We went and woke him up at 3 a.m. for the very cool reunion. Can you imagine being woken up at 3 a.m. in a foreign country to be reunited with a friend from 12 years ago? Imagine just how weird and confusing that would be. How long would you be wondering if it was a dream? I feel like I would almost freak out because it would be such a strange, unlikely occurrence. But also, could this reunion not have waited until at least 5 a.m.? Come on! Story 14. When I was 18, I dated a girl who went to a private school. She told me they were having a dance, so I thought, okay, great, it'll be a nice night. She told me that only boys from a specific boys' private school were allowed to come because of an incident once when they let everyone in. Some girl got really drunk and puked on the headmaster's shoes, so they limited it to one boys' school after that. Fast forward 12 years, and I'm with my fiancée, different girl, at a wedding shower. I overhear my wife, "I was so embarrassed when I puked on the headmaster's shoes." I yelled, "That was you? That's awesome. I love you even more now that you're famous." Too long didn't read. My wife C-blocked me 12 years before we met. Story 15. I have 2. 20 years ago, my family and I lived in Germany. My folks and sister lived there about 12 years prior before I was born. One day, my mom, sis, and I are walking in an open marketplace, and my mom says, "I wonder what happened to Mrs. XYZ. You know, that lady who babysat you, sister, when you were a baby?" Not 10 minutes later, my mom stops a random woman in the market and says, "Excuse me, are you Mrs. XYZ?" Yup. Hadn't seen her in over a decade. Happened to find her right after saying her name. The other one just happened this week. I'm a teacher and usually have music playing in the classroom as kids walk in. I have Smooth Criminal by MJ playing, and a kid walks in saying, "Whoa, this is the same song my iPod played as my alarm this morning." Less than a minute later, a different kid walks in. "Whoa, this is the same song my Sonos played as my alarm this morning." Of all the songs possible, me, Apple, and Sonos chose the same one on the exact same day. I mean, that is a pretty decent coincidence, but also, it's performed by one of the top 100 singers of all time, according to the Rolling Stones, and is one of his most famous songs. I'm not saying that it isn't still a coincidence, but I'm just saying that I would be more impressed if it was like Deer Dance by System of a Down. Now that would be a coincidence. It would also make you a pretty cool teacher. Story 16. Nobody believes me when I tell this story, but one day my husband and I ran into the same couple at 3 different places in 2 different states. So my husband and I had an errand to run out of state. We leave early and stop to get breakfast. The couple was sitting across from us. The lady had on a funky shirt, which is why she stuck out in my mind. After breakfast, we drive the next state over to the office we have an appointment at. We're waiting in the lobby, and the couple from the breakfast joint walks in. Weird. So we spend the day finishing up our errands, and then we drive back home. I didn't feel like cooking, so we stopped to get some dinner at the pub. We sit down at the table, and guess who's already eating at the table behind us? The same friggin' couple. Story 17. Here in my little town in northwest England, there's a good kebab shop from which the lads and I have ordered for years. We've been in there after countless nights out and had them delivered to our doors, so we know the guys who work there pretty well. They are mostly Turkish. Once a few of us got together for a short break in Turkey. Having gotten off the plane, we waited in the car park outside for another pal who'd been on a different flight. As we stood, soaking in the ambiance of a new country, none other than the tall guy from our local kebab shop walked across the road right in front of us 2,000 miles from home. That was weird. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.